All right, let's get started. Glad you're here. Welcome back as we continue our study of developing a unique community, the role of the Ten Commandments. So we started with kind of an intro, and just to remind you, the idea is, just as the title of the class implies, the development of a unique community. Or to use a very religious word, a holy community. And that is significant because Genesis begins with Adam and Eve, humanity, God creating humanity, just all as, it's one humanity. It's one humanity, one race, one group, one family. And we were to reflect upon this reality, the image of God, right? Yahweh, Lord God. Yet, Genesis 3 forward, things get complicated. Humanity's offered the option of either allow God's presence to mature us into what it means to be a humanity that reflects the presence of God, or take upon ourselves, like children, roll your eyes at your parents, say it's my life, and then take upon yourself the responsibility to mature humanity by our own wits. Well, just as if you were to allow your 8-year-old to go into that adventure, you can imagine how horrible that would turn out. Welcome to the mess of humanity, right? So that's what humanity has done. We have raised ourselves into this horrible mess. We've divided our united humanity into many groups. We've divided and we've made all kinds of lines in the sand, all the way from ethnicities to land and water, and all kinds of politics, many different reasons that we have divided, my tribe, your tribe, and now we live in this horrible mess. But God, out of that mess, with a family, Abraham calls out of that mess a family to then uniquely mature them into what humanity was meant to be. And they were to be an example, a call to the rest of the broken humanity to gather upon once again the presence of God. Right? So the 10 Commandments have not just 10, there's 613 to them. This will be on a quiz. 613 commandments. 10 are the heart of it. And those commands, that law, that covenant, was to develop in this family what it means to be a unique community with the exclusive presence of God. Significant because where have they just spent the last 400 years? In Egypt. I don't know how intensely unique you try to stay as a people group. If you're somebody, if you're in some culture for 400 years, you're there, right? You're that culture. And so they've been there 400 years. The last 100 or so, they've been abused, they've been enslaved, and they've really gotten the short end of the stick on that deal. But then God is going to free them from that oppression, and that's where we come into Exodus, which is descriptive. What is God doing? Exiting them from that world, from that oppression, from that conflict of empires, of people groups, to free them from that, to then once again mold them into a unique community. However, here's the rub. You can get them out of Egypt, but it's going to be a lot harder process to exit Egypt out of them. Isn't that a country song? You can get the boy out of the country, but you can't get the country out of the boy. It's got to be a country song. It sounds like a country song. So, how do you exit Egypt's worldview, the many gods, that world of oppression and power plays and my people versus your people and many? How do you exit that out of a people group? so that only Yahweh can be there. So once again, welcome to the commandments, right? All 613 of them. We're not covering all of those. We're just covering 10. And so we started with number 1, of course, which is the premise of what they are to be. Uniquely gods. So thou shalt have no other gods, right? So number 1 right there. Numero uno is no other gods. Because that was a thing. Everybody and their dog had gods. Sometimes the dog was their god. I mean, it's just gods everywhere. Every people group, every tribe, every family, every village, every, gods. So what would it look like to be Yahweh only? Only. Right? So number 1 there. Number 2, you shall make no images for yourself of gods or even of Yahweh. And the premise was, why not? Because Yahweh has already images made on his behalf. And that is us, humanity. So you don't need a stick, a statue, a clump of clay, or what. You don't need to represent Yahweh. He's already represented. Us, humanity. Then number 3 we saw last. No, that's today. Number 3, today. I'm also teaching this a couple other places. Number 3, we're number 3 here. You shall not, I feel like I should do some kind of godly voice. Is that okay? Okay. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who has misused his name. Right, so these 10 are foundational. They're the heart of what the whole covenant represents. So you shall not misuse the name of your Lord or use it in vain. Some translations say you shall not profane the name of your God. And of course, we as Westerners believe the Bible was written directly to us, and we apply it from our own setting, and we take that to mean thou shalt not cuss. And no, that's not what that means. Please don't cuss with the name of the Lord either. I'm going to guess that's not a good idea. But that's not what it means. That's not what it means. And we need to put it in its setting, and we need to go into its context. And let's see if we can go a little deeper here and see why this is top 10, right? Top 10. Well, let's go to Exodus chapter 28 and 29. Okay, so here is all part of this. We're still at this covenant. We're at Mount Sinai where, some time back, Moses interacted with the presence of God, right? The burning bush is this connecting point of God in the world, and Moses is there, and it's at here, Mount Sinai. So he brings the people after they've been freed from Egypt. He brings them here to interact with God where he connected with God. And so God comes down from his cosmic heaven, and he comes to the mountaintop, which was a common imagery of high places connecting you with the world of the gods in the ancient world. And so he's there, and then Moses is going to be this intercessor. He goes up several times, intercessor. One of those, he comes down with the 10 Commandments. Okay. And all this is molding them or equipping them. From that, they spent about 1.5 years here. From there, they're supposed to then be ready, equipped with all they need. The presence of God, who's going to go with them in the tabernacle. The law, right? All 613 there. The priests and their duties is all going to be laid out. So then they're going to be structured in how they're to camp, ready, empowered. And from there, they were supposed to take the promised land. So we're at that moment being prepared, okay? Chapter 28 and 29 are specific instructions on priestly garments, which I'm sure is everyone's favorite 2 chapters, right after Leviticus, where it talks about all the skin diseases and, which I think are Tim's favorite chapter. So Priestly garments. We normally whatever, skip over. It's a bunch of weird stuff and kind of color things and something. Okay, but there's some significance here. So Aaron is going to be dressed a particular way, and it's all very symbolic. It's all very intentional. We don't have time to walk through every part of it. But a couple of things we want to know. One is he has this breastplate with stones, precious stones through that, and it's very descriptive how they're supposed to line up. And every one of those stones, there's 12 of them, has the name of the tribes. So Aaron is to bear the name of the tribes. Okay. The word that's translated in English, do not take the Lord's name in vain or don't profane, is the word nasa. Super easy to remember because you spell it like NASA. But nasa, which literally means lift up. So do not lift up the name of the Lord in vain. Do not, which is a little weird, but think about this. So Aaron, as a priest, had the stones with the names of the tribes. This is why. He was to represent the tribes, to lift the name of the tribes, and to represent the names of the tribes as he interacted with God. So he's representing, he's bearing the name of the tribes before Yahweh. Does that make sense? Because the priest is a representative. Okay, then you go through, skip. One other thing is, then you get to chapter 28, and it's talking about, I'll tell you the verse here specifically if you're intrigued. Chapter 28, you get to verse 36, 37, 38, and there he says that you're to have this little plate of gold, and on the plate it is to say, Holy of Yahweh. So the name of Yahweh, and he's to tie that on his forehead. Why is he doing that? Because the priest had an interceding role both directions. The priest was basically the connecting point of two worlds. The world of the cosmic world, of the heavenly world of God, and this reality. And he is to represent upon the two groups, God and his people, both directions. So as he enters the presence of God, he bears the name of the tribes, of the people. As he then comes out and interacts with the people, he bears the name of God. Does that make sense? Now, I'm not sure, I don't know everybody to the degree I probably would like to, so I'm not sure if any of you are descendants of Levi, and especially of Aaron, because then you could be priests. I'm going to guess none of us are that. So you're thinking, yeah, that's interesting, but nobody else wears that stuff. And okay, go back to Exodus chapter 19, right before the Ten Commandments. We read this at our introductory class a few weeks ago. Verse 4. Verse 3. Moses went up to God, because Moses plays this interceding role as well, right? And the Lord, Yahweh, called to him from the mountain and says, this is what you are to say to the descendants of Jacob and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings, it's poetic, and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, which includes the Ten Commandments, right? Keep my covenant. Then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possessions. Although the whole world is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. So Israel as a people group were to be priestly. They were to intercede, intercede on behalf of humanity unto God, and then on behalf of God unto humanity. We are to represent humanity because we bear each other's image. Like, we are of the same human race. So we are of the same people representing ourselves on behalf of God or to God. But we are a special holy people, uniquely selected within the world, the nations, to bear the name of Yahweh. And in our priestly duties, when we interact with the world, we are bearing upon them or to them God. How cool is that? Jesus said the same thing slightly different. Matthew chapter 5, verse 14 and 15, 16, he says to a bunch of peasants, to like the nobodies of that community, of that world, you are the light of the world. You're probably thinking, we? Like, oh, nobody listens to me. Like, nobody was asking that group of people for anything. Opinions of, like, they had no influence. It says, you are the light of the world. And by your behavior, people will give glory to God. Why? Why would my behavior people give glory to God? What Jesus is saying, just with different words, is because we bear the image of God. We bear the brightness of God. Or if we go with this language here, we bear the name of God. Is that making sense? That's why we are representatives of God unto humanity. If you go back to Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, God creates humanity, male and female, in the image of God. Here's, once again, I've made this imagery to you already. Remember Thor, the 9 realms? Okay, think of that, but fewer realms. There's the realm of physical realm, which the Genesis calls earth, or the heavens and the earth. But don't think lump of rock. Think the physical realm. The heavens, don't think sky where birds chirp and fly and airplanes and atmosphere. Think the cosmic world of God. So the spiritual world, and then there's the physical world. God is in the heavens. Is God not here? Sure he is. How? Us. We are the image of the cosmic God here, representing him. Now, we've done a sucky job of that, right? I mean, really, really bad. Or if you want to go with the King James, suckieth, okay? Very bad job there. But we are to represent the image of God. We are to be God's representatives because we bear his image or his name. Literally, the priests have the name, and since we are to be priestly, so do we. I mean, we don't put a plate with name on it, but we carry the name of Yahweh because we are to be his people in a world of other gods. And they bore the name of other gods through different clothes or imageries or tattoos or whatever else. You knew they were Babylonian or Canaanites or Egyptian or Assyrian. What about these folks? Oh, they're Yahweh's people. Okay? They're Yahweh's people. Okay, back to Exodus chapter 20. So what could it possibly mean, do not misuse the name of the Lord your God in vain? If it's not talking about cussing, what is it talking about? How we live. That's what it means. It's much more cosmic than just cussing, which is in there somewhere, that's fine, right? Not to belittle that interpretation, but it's in there. But it's so much more. The way we live either accurately bears and reflects God, or it does it horrible disservice. So don't do God's name a horrible disservice. Let me give you another example. Numbers this is all about that same time. Okay, Numbers chapter 5. These books overlap. Numbers chapter 5. Here's still articulating the law, right? We're still like expounding, explaining the law, all 613 of it. And then we talk about restitution for wrongs. So in this community, when you have wronged somebody, there's restitution. And then there's all kinds of layers of that. It's really interesting read. But verse 5. The Lord, Yahweh said to Moses, say to the Israelites, any man or woman who wrongs another in any way, and so is unfaithful to Yahweh, will be guilty. And then he starts going into what you do with that. So think about here in God's thought process. If I wrong you, I have wronged God. I have wronged God. So think about that. If I have wronged you, I have wronged God. Thus, I should be very intentional of restitution. Otherwise, who's going to punish me? God. But why? I didn't wrong God. God, I don't have a beef with you. It's over here. No, yet yes, you do. Because we bear the name of God. And how I treat you and how you treat me is really inevitably how you're treating God and a representative of God. If you go then a little further here, Numbers chapter 11. Here is where Miriam and Aaron turn on Moses. Nothing like family to oppose you. I mean, it's just family. Does anybody ever watch Monk? You all know what that is? Okay. It's really funny. He's got issues. He reminds me a little of Tim, but, maybe not to that extreme. But some of you don't watch Monk, so you don't know how funny that statement was. But that's okay. So Monk says that he's got this very brilliant, like he's a great detective, and he'll say, people will be like, man, Mr. Monk, it's a blessing. He goes, and a curse. Mostly a curse. Kind of like family. A blessing, sometimes a curse. Mostly a curse. So, Miriam and Aaron are going to basically betray Moses. We're talking early on. Early on. They get jealous. So they start basically saying, Moses, like God only speaks to him. Hey, we're pretty small. We're pretty, special people too. There's Aaron. He's going to be the high priest. Come on. And so they start bad-mouthing Moses. God hears of that. Verse 4. At once the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, come out of the tent of meeting, all three of you. So now we're going to get a talking here. Then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud. He stood at the entrance of the tent, summoned Aaron and Miriam. When the two of them stepped forward, he said, listen to my words. He's going to get them on chewing. And then you get to the end of verse 8. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And then if you read the in-between is because he's representing me. You think you're talking bad about him? You're talking bad about me. Because Moses was bearing the name of God upon the people. He was a representative of God upon the people. He was in the image of God upon the people. So when they started speaking, especially these two, against Moses, God is like, I'm mad because you're talking about me. Not that Moses is God. You understand that. We're not God. We try to play God, but we're not God. We're bearing his name. We're representing him. We're his image. So the way we treat each other has everything to do with the way we treat God. That has everything to do with the way we treat each other. So back to Exodus. Here's what, and if you misuse God's name, once again, if you mistreat each other, if you profane each other, God will not hold anyone guiltless. Like he will, let's say that in the positive statement. There's too many nots there. He will hold you and you will be guilty. But today we even do cuss and put God's name in there, so that's already bold. But it's so much more than that. So much more than that. How I treat you and you treat me is profaning God. Now, all the other gods, they had their statues, and most of them would have the name of the god on that statue. So that statue, people didn't think it was God, their gods. They thought it was a representation of the gods. But for you to mistreat the statue that had the name of the god was, in that ancient world, you were disrespecting their God. So you would be held accountable. If you're over there, messing with some statue of some god, it would be as if you were messing with that God. So in that ancient world, to say this wasn't like, oh, what a shock. But it is shocking because who is, once again, the image of this God? We are. And that we is we, humanity, we. Now, we're not all accurately representing that image, but here the point isn't just don't mistreat Israelites one another, is don't mistreat humanity. Humanity. Leviticus chapter 19, okay? It starts once again the chapter there with the idea, I am your God, I am Yahweh, and be a holy people, and then it goes on to loving one another. So it starts to talk about how we are to treat each other, and let's go. Leviticus, I was just going to paraphrase, let's just go to Leviticus, which is, I'm sure, everybody's second favorite book. Leviticus 19, get in there. Okay, 19. So, verse 1. The Lord said to Moses, speak to the entire assembly of Israel and say to them, and here it's this repetitive concept, be set apart because I am Yahweh, your set apart God. All right, so in a world of gods, I am uniquely Yahweh, and thus you will be unique because you bear my name only. You bear my name only. With that in mind, here's some ways we should treat each other, so that we don't profane the image of God, okay? Or the name of God. Verse 15, do not pervert justice. Do not show partiality to the poor or favoritism to the great, but judge your neighbor fairly. Why not? The poor. Who cares how you treat them? Yahweh does, because they're still bearing the name of God. How about the great, the rich? Shouldn't we praise them and put them on pedestals and follow them with our, social media or other versions of it then? No. But they're great. Yeah, no. Okay, don't elevate them and don't mistreat these. They're all bearing the name of God. So you just treat them accordingly to that. So don't pervert justice. Don't show partiality. Verse 16, do not go about spreading slander among your people. Why not? Because you're profaning the name of God. What does slandering means? It's you, slanting reality, right? It's you assuming things. It's you taking whatever facts you think you understand, and then you slant those and you make your own judgments of it. You fill in the gaps, you make assumptions, you assign motives, and then if that wasn't enough, if you're at least doing that and keeping that in your own head, whatever. But But then we go on and spread that to others. As if we truly understand people's lives and hearts and so forth. And God says, no, don't do that. Don't do that. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. Why not? Because I am Yahweh. What does that have to do with how I treat my neighbor? Well, it's the point I keep making. Everything. You should not mistreat your neighbor because they bear the name of God. They represent God. All of humanity does. Verse 17, do not hate a fellow Israelite. So here's more specific. Do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart, but you can rebuke your neighbor frankly so you will not share in their guilt. So there is responsibility in community, right? We're helping each other along. But we're helping each other, but we're not doing so out of hate, anger, slander. We're truly helping one another. All right. Verse 18. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against anyone among your people, but instead love one another. Love your neighbor as yourself. Once again, why? Because I am Yahweh. Well, that's cool, right? We're to love one another. Or actually it says your neighbor. Now this was written 1,500 years before Jesus. You know what folks did for 1,500 years? I mean, they did a bunch of stuff. But you know what they specifically did with this for 1,500 years? Debated. Who is my neighbor? Isn't that interesting that that's part of what Jesus answers? You know, the whole story of the Good Samaritan. Oh, how offensive that story was. How offensive. Who is being neighborly in that story? The priest? The rabbi? The Samaritan. Which you're like, oh yeah, VBS. Yeah, no. The Samaritan was, the Jews and the Samaritans hated each other only for 700 years. Small little few. 700. And then Jesus makes the hero of his story answering this question. A 1,500-year-old question. Who's being neighborly? The Samaritan. And then Jesus had the courage to then call him the Good Samaritan. Oh, folks were angry with Jesus. Angry. And so Jesus will answer this question. If you go to Matthew chapter 5, the end of the chapter, Jesus is going to remind them of this. You have heard it say, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Jesus goes, but I say unto you. And who's Jesus? In Matthew's account, he's presented as God with us. Come on, it's brilliant. He's connecting it back here to Exodus. God comes down from the heavens to be with the people, and he's giving these commandments. And one of them has to do with, don't mistreat each other that bears my name. And so then Jesus says, but I tell you, hold that thought, because we still need to go to verse 33 of Leviticus 19. Not Jesus yet. God here isn't done. So even here, God's already answering the question, who is my neighbor? Because you might be thinking, surely he means us Israelites. Jesus even said that. Like, what people doesn't love their very own? Pagans love their very own. Tax collectors. Oh, if you have negative feelings around tax season, take that and just multiply it by a lot, and you might start to understand how they felt about tax collectors. Tax collectors were Jews who saw the writing on the wall and decided to make money off the oppression of their own people. So here's the Romans, military occupation, using and abusing and extorting the Israelites, and some of these Jews are like, I'm going to make money off of this by collecting taxes. So they would collect whatever Rome required, 30, 40%, and then their salary was anything they wanted to collect on top of that. It's almost like Congress that can choose their own salaries. Okay, so they could too. And if you didn't like it, they'd be like, and then here comes the thuggish Romans, are going to give a beating to you and slap you around because you said something about their taxes. So when Jesus says turn the other cheek, that's the scene. Okay, but so the folks here would have been thinking, maybe this just means Israel, right? My own people? No. Even verse 33 of Leviticus 19. When a foreigner resides among you in your very land, do not mistreat them. Why not? Because the foreigner residing among you must be treated as your native born. Love your neighbor. You mean the foreigner is my neighbor? Yes. Yes. Now back to Jesus. Jesus says, you have heard it say, love your neighbor. And they would have heard it here in Leviticus 19 and heard it for 1,500 years. But then where would they have heard and hate your enemy? Well, that's just the consensus by the time Jesus comes around, especially because of the past 700 years, Israel had been ruled over by pagan overlords for 600 of those 700 years. Can you imagine that legacy? That backstory? Would you be angry? Yeah, oh, yes. Yes. And so they were like, all hate your enemy. And what does Jesus say? Oh, but I tell you, love your enemy. Pray for those that persecute. I pray that they burn in hell. No, not that prayer. Not that prayer. Pray for them, right? For that God. And then he goes on to say, God is generous to them. Does the sun only rise to God's people? No, the sun rises to all of humanity. Because in reality, they all bear the name of God. Does it only rain on the crops of God's people? No, it rains on the crops of all people, because in reality, they all bear the name of God. So Jesus says, thus, love your enemies. Once again, brilliant little hashtag, but extremely intense if you've been ruled over for 600 years. Folks didn't like that, love your enemy, very much. That was unpatriotic. There's some things you could say today about some folks out there that many would consider unpatriotic. I hope we rethink some of that. And I'll leave that at that. But, so back to Exodus. Once again, this is not just about cussing, folks. That is too simplistic, too decontextualized. This is so much more. How you treat your spouse, yeah, even your spouse. How you treat your family, even some of your family. How you treat your geographical neighbor. How you treat those that you might think are different than you. Right? Down the list of things we use to divide people. Okay, that's all an illusion. We've created those things. So even those that you think are different than you, or even your enemies, is you profaning the name of God. Does that sound intense? Think God cares how we treat each other? You think that also applies to how we treat each other on social media? Oh, I've had to give that a break. I was getting angry at those that were angry. Does that make sense? I was just like, no. It's just, no, come on. And then people have the courage to even throw out the name of Jesus in some of their rantings. I keep wanting to quote stuff like, yes, Exodus 23. And then somebody be like, but I'm not cussing, so I don't even post that. Most of my posts are, the most controversial post that I think I've ever put there, and it got the most comments, is when I made apparently the bold statement that anytime two buns come together, mayonnaise should be present. Some folks, yeah, well, thank you. Some folks didn't know to appreciate that. And that apparently was very controversial. So I've backed off from that because, I don't want to stir. So now I just put some fluffy things up there from time to time. Come on. This is why studies that have been done about how non-church folks perceive church folks, and Tim's mentioned this before, the top 2 ways that they perceive non-church folks. Anybody want to guess the very first one? Or remember what Tim said? How does the world mostly see Christianity? Hypocrites. And number 2? Judgy. Yeah, that's right. Judgy. I don't think we're doing this one very well. I don't think we're doing this one very well. I think we've made a way to loophole it by saying, oh, I don't cuss with God's name in it. Well, good for you. But how do you treat people? That matters. That matters. So even though the top 4 here, and that we're going to get to 4 next time, even though the top 4 are mostly your interaction with God, it's already becoming crystal clear that your interaction with God must play out in your interaction with each other. Then the next 6 are very specific about your interaction with each other. It's important how we treat each other. Faith can't be done any different. It can't be just me, Jesus, and selfies. That's not a thing. It has to do with how we treat each other. Very, very, very important. And once again, God will hold you guilty if you misuse or if you treat those that bear his name, if you treat that in a profane way. All right, so next time, remember the Sabbath. So go ye and do not profane the name of the Lord.